Our next keynote session is with Sarah Johnson, the VP of Enterprise Surveys and Analytics at Perceptyx. Sarah has more than 30 years of experience in organization surveys and people analytics, including survey practice leader at CEB and leading survey and analytics programs at Kodak and IBM. So Sarah will be discussing continuous learning, leading the way forward with people analytics. Sarah, are you good to go?
I am. Thank you very much for the introduction. I hope you can see me and see my slides as well.
You look great and you sound great, so I'll hand the mic over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And thanks for the introduction. And thank you to all of you for taking time out of what I know is a busy schedule to participate in this. I think it's so important as we go through this very challenging time to think about continuously renewing our thinking, what we know, how we interact, trying new things, and listening to new ideas. And so that's what I want to do today. I want to talk a little bit about some of the research that we have been doing at Perceptyx, and hoping that that will provide you with the insights and the data that you need to help your leaders make good decisions about people within the organization. Perceptyx, if you haven't heard from us, is an organizational survey, research, and people analytics platform. And analytics is really what we are all about. And I think 2020 was the year when people analytics really showed its value to organizations. You know, we went through an unprecedented period of time, and my daughter has asked me to stop saying unprecedented. So I'm trying to avoid it, but sometimes there is no better word to describe what happened. Everything changed within our organizations, from the way we work to how we interact to how we live our lives day to day. But as challenging as 2020 was, it wasn't the first time a world event has kind of upended how we work. And if you remember 2008, the Great Recession, that changed a lot for a lot of our organizations and for a lot of us personally, as jobs were changed, jobs were slashed within organizations, companies restructured. When you think about it, 2008 was the CFO's moment. That was the opportunity for the CFO to get hold of costs within the organization, to restructure, to cut those benefits, to slash the number of jobs within the organization, to rethink how the company operated. Well, 2020, when you think about it, is the CHRO's moment. 2020 represented, the COVID pandemic represented a people challenge. How do we keep people safe? How do we continue to enable the people who work for us to do their jobs effectively and to keep the organization functioning productively? How do we support them with learning new skills and learning new capabilities? How do we advise our managers and our leaders as to what happens going forward? You know, normally, if you want to understand the road ahead, you seek advice from someone who's been there before. Well, 2020 gave us a situation where none of us has been here before. So what do? We can't base our decisions on gut feeling or what we think might happen. We need to make decisions with facts and data. And so that's where people analytics comes into the mix, because those analytics provide us with a great sense of what's going on that enables us to make good data-based decisions about our people. So again, I'm going to do a quick review of some of the research that we have conducted in 2020. Okay, so one of the biggest changes we have seen is the shift to remote work. Now, let me explain to you what you're seeing on this graph. Take a look at the two bars on the far left, where labeled prior to COVID-19. Now, before COVID-19 hit, about 60 to 65% of employees were working in the physical workplace, whether that was an office, retail, manufacturing, or in a healthcare organization. About 24% were working remotely, and between 10 and 15%, depending on if you're a man or a woman, were working in a hybrid situation, which is a combination of in the office, but working at home. As you can see, during COVID, those second two bars, that changed dramatically. Only a third of employees were just slightly more than a third of employees were working in the physical workplace. A big chunk of employees shifted to remote work, and then some employees were still using a hybrid model. Now, it was interesting. Initially, felt kind of chaotic working at home, trying to sort out how to do it, where to do it, how to get my situation to work, how do you manage the kids. But it was interesting, as we followed this desire, where you want to work, we found that by the end of summer, most employees had kind of figured out the remote work thing and sort of enjoyed it. But over time, we have found that the interest or the appeal of remote work has worn off a little bit. When we ask men and women, where do you want to work after COVID, when kind of the world sort of goes back to whatever normal is going to look like, we found that about a third of them, slightly more than a third, wanted to be in the physical workplace, but far fewer of them were looking to do a remote only experience, with a larger chunk wanting to have something of a hybrid approach. Now, what's interesting is when you take a look at whether men or women are more or less likely to want to return to the workplace, we found that you can see on the left, the bar with women, about 47% of women are much less likely to want to return to the physical workplace than they were 6 months ago, which was probably the beginning of the school year in 2020. But we've got about 26% who are saying, I'm more likely to want to go back to the workplace than I was 6 months ago. Now, that's a different story for men. We've got about a third of men, 35%, saying I am much more likely to want to go back to the workplace, and I'm less likely to want to continue. I'm less likely to want to go back to the workplace. Now, what does that hybrid approach look like? We've had a lot of employees say, I'm interested in a hybrid working approach. What does that feel like? Well, what's interesting is that the majority of employees are telling us that they want to spend more days in the office, in the physical workplace, than they do spend at home. So when we ask women, 59% of women are saying, I want to spend at least 3 days in the office every week. Now, this is a larger number for men. Men are saying 65% of men are saying, I want to spend at least 3 days in the office. So even if we go to a hybrid approach, employees are looking to spend more time in the office and fewer of those days working from home in that hybrid work situation. Now, one of the reasons why we see a big difference between men and women in terms of their work preferences is the burden that is placed on many women differentially when it comes to childcare responsibility. When we look at men versus women, women are the green bar, men are the blue bar. We find that whether you're an individual contributor or in more of an executive position, women have greater responsibility for childcare than men do. And they also have greater responsibility for scheduling and arrangements for those kids. So women bear much more of the burden when it comes to taking care of all of these elements for the family. And one of the big challenges that many working parents have had to shoulder in the last 12 months is the challenge of remote learning, having kids go to school virtually. When we asked all parents, which is that top row, what has been the impact of remote learning in your family? Well, 60% say it's been a family burden. 42% say it makes me insecure about my job because I'm distracted. Over half of the working parents said I'm very distracted by remote learning. And almost half say I feel very unproductive because of remote learning. There's just so much going on. Now, when we took a look at all parents and we split it into mothers versus fathers, that's the second row of this graph, we found that there were some interesting differences between fathers and mothers. Fathers were more likely to say that it's a burden. They are more likely to say that they are distracted, and they are more likely to say, slightly more likely to say, that they feel unproductive as a result of remote learning. But we wanted to take a look at this mother's population in greater detail. That bottom row of this visual shows you how we have broken out mothers by job level. And in this case, we're looking at the difference between perceptions or the adverse effects of remote learning for women who are individual contributors versus women who are in leadership or executive positions. And here's what's interesting. Women executives, those women who have helped shatter that glass ceiling, move into significant leadership roles within their organizations, are really feeling the pressure. They are far more likely to say it's a burden. They are more likely to say that they feel insecure about their jobs because they are so distracted and they feel so unproductive at work, much more so than women in individual contributor roles. Now, fortunately, what we've learned is that in most cases, managers and organizations are very understanding about this unique situation and have been very supportive of women and working parents in general when it comes to providing the flexibility they need to run those, to do their jobs effectively and to manage everything else that they've got going on at home. On that left-hand graph, you can see that both men and women report that by and large, their managers are very supportive of and understanding of their unique needs. Women slightly less than men. And the same deal with the organization. The organization is very supportive, providing flexibility to enable me to work from home. But, you know, one of the biggest casualties of the pandemic has been the significant loss of working mothers within the workplace. And we have found that, and it's been all over the news and the press, we're not the only ones to report this, that there has been a significant loss of working mothers in the workplace. And a lot of these women haven't so much opted to leave the workplace as though they feel as though they've had no choice. We wanted to understand what is it that organizations can do to enable these women to stay within the organization. So we took a look at female caregivers, working mothers, and we asked them, do you want to stay with your organization? We found that 31% of these working women said that they definitely wanted to stay with their organization. Okay, so what's going to keep you there? What can the organization do to retain you in the company? Well, one of the drivers of intention to stay was a flexible work schedule, but one that is defined by the organization. In other words, it might be 2 days off, it might be working a core set of hours, but the structure of this flexible schedule is one that is defined by the organization. So that organization imposed flexible schedule was helpful, but what was even more helpful was a self-imposed flexible schedule. Okay, so what is a self-imposed flexible schedule? It's giving me as the individual the ability to choose when I work. So maybe I decide I'm going to get up at 4:30 a.m. and I'm going to work a couple of hours really focused before the kids get up. Then I'm going to take a couple of hour breaks to get the kids fed, get them sorted out with their virtual learning. I might work another 90 minutes late morning, then feed everyone lunch. I might work a little bit while the kids are back at their school or napping or whatever it may be. And maybe I'll finish up the day between 9 p.m. and midnight so that I can get some work done while the kids are asleep. The ability to make a choice in how work gets done and when it gets done is a significant factor in enabling working mothers to stay within the organization. But was even more impactful than that self-imposed schedule was if my manager understands my unique needs and if my organization gives me flexibility. So if I can talk to my manager one-on-one, and if my manager can say to me, I'm here for you to help you figure out what's going to work best, I'm willing to give you that flexibility, that means an enormous amount to these working women. So it's very important for us to think about how do we create that capability in the management team to share that flexibility, to provide that understanding, and to enable these women to stay within the organization. The bottom line is that programs are nice, whether it's daycare or flexible schedules, they're great. but sometimes they're rigid. What really helps women is this ability to sort it out themselves, to give them that flexibility to make those choices on their own. But here's the thing that we're all wondering about and scratching our heads. If women are physically in the office fewer days, and we know this because we understand that from our research that more women want to work either a remote or hybrid schedule, what is going to be the impact on their career progression? What is going to be the impact on their getting known within the organization, their ability to influence the direction of the company? It's something we all need to think about. Now, here's another thing that is important to think about in terms of influence within the organization. When we asked employees, where do you want to work when the pandemic is over? We found some pretty big differences between different age groups. And surprising to us, at least, was the percentage of young people, what you might want to call digital natives, those employees who are 24 years old and younger, to want to come back to the physical workplace. Now, this surprised us a little bit. We thought if anyone is equipped to work remotely, it's these young people who have grown up with technology. But when you think about it, someone who is starting their career is looking for that opportunity to make a name for themselves. They want to be noticed. They want to feel a connection with the organization. They want the opportunity to learn new things and interact with new people. And so a lot of our organizations have continued to hire during the pandemic, and we've onboarded employees virtually. Well, it's going to be interesting to find out what the long-term impact of virtual onboarding is going to be. This table represents some research that we did to understand what are the elements of the onboarding process that impact employee engagement a couple of years after the employee has joined the organization. So what was it about onboarding that influenced later engagement? Well, here's what's interesting. These are the top 5 drivers of employee engagement a couple of years after onboarding. Look at the 3 that I've highlighted. Top drivers include, I feel like I really belong at this company. I feel valued as an employee of the company. And the onboarding process has enabled me to quickly establish a network at the company. These are all the challenges that these young employees are facing within the organization. Because they're not there physically, it's entirely possible that these employees won't fully engage with the organization. We've got to come up with clever ways to engage them, to help them develop a network, and to do that virtually if we want to keep that talent. So we've got to think about how do we create this sense of connection between our new hires, regardless of their age, along with their team, the manager, and the business, so that we can maintain the cultures of their organization. The last thing that I want to talk about is some research that Perceptyx has done in conjunction with the Josh Bersin Academy. And in this particular research study, we wanted to understand what were the organizational actions that had the greatest influence on the success of the organization in the period of the pandemic. What practices had the greatest positive impact on organizational outcomes? Now, on the right hand of the screen, you can see the examples of those practices that had little impact or the lowest impact. And these are all the kinds of things that you kind of have to do to keep the lights on. We had to figure out remote work. We had to make sure that the work environment was clean. We had to, integrate HR with other functions within the organization to kind of keep all the trains running. But what had the greatest impact in the organization focused really on 3 issues: health and well-being, business agility and change, and adaptive transformation. The ability of the HR organization to understand the situation, to pivot to new ideas, to find new ways, and in some cases, kind of experimental ways, to help the organization adapt to the new scenario. So things like simplifying and speeding up performance management, listening to the workplace in a time of difficult change, reinforcing and reinvigorating the focus on purpose and mission. So listen, We at Perceptyx have created a ton of great research. I certainly encourage you to go to our website. You can see it there to find out more research, to download research reports, to listen to our webinars, to find out more about the work that we've done with the Josh Bersin Academy. I know I only have a couple of minutes left, but I want to see if there are any questions from the audience.
Thank you, Sarah. We do have a couple of questions, but since you mentioned your blogs, I wanted to piggyback off of that. I want to mention to people that I was at your booth earlier, your virtual booth here, and I saw an insights report, men stay for culture, women stay for empowerment. And when you were going over the slides earlier, I was like, oh, that's great. So I would love for people to go and download that. I also saw the Communications During Crisis playbook. So I figured that's also helpful. So, but let me get to those questions for you, Sarah. Something came in from Sean. How large is the research population for the work from home research from you guys? And what industries are the research population from?
So all of that research was based on a panel study. So that panel population represents lots of different industries. We always specify that we want working adults above a certain age. And we always want people who are working full time. And that population is large enough to be representative of the United States.
Okay, perfect. And then someone else sent another question that says, is the data from your organization, and how did you gather this type of data through surveys, et cetera?
Yeah, and we do a lot of different studies. I mean, I talked about the panel research that we do. The analysis that I showed you that linked onboarding experience with employee engagement was actually based on data that our clients had collected. We looked across all of the onboarding surveys that many of our clients had conducted, and we were able to link those employees' responses to the onboarding survey with how they responded to their company's engagement survey. So we approach research from a lot of different perspectives using client data as well as panel data. There's some researchers out there. I'm impressed with these questions.
Well, keep them coming, guys, and we'll get them over to Sarah. This is really in your wheelhouse, Sarah. I have a comment here, and maybe there's more of a reaction to this, but Susan had shared, in my 40 years of work, I am a woman. Being physically present each day makes a huge difference when promotions are in play. So I don't know if you have any insight into that.
Yeah, and actually that's a great point. And that's, it's easy to say, oh yeah, let people work remotely. Isn't that great for women that they can work remotely? But I don't think we're fully considering the consequences. Just as Susan has mentioned, what we don't know is how this will impact the long-term progression of women within the organization. For example, there was a great study that was done at an organization in China. It was kind of a field experiment, and they allowed people to choose, do you want to work remotely or do you want to work in the office? Those employees who worked remotely, while they liked the experience, they were far less likely to get promoted, and they were less likely to get positive, or they got slightly less positive performance reviews. So there is a benefit to being in the office, to being noticed, to feeling as though you have some influence within the organization.
Didn't want to interrupt, so I muted myself there briefly. A question that more so popped into my head, and I'm going to ask this while we see if any more questions do come in, is, when with the pandemic, still in play right now, do you foresee or predict that those percentages might shift or alter, in 6 months' time or 12 months' time?
I do. And, it's interesting. As I said before, over the summer, we found that people were really liking the whole remote work experience. But as time has gone on, we've seen that shift. We've seen a lot of employees saying, yeah, I don't know, I kind of miss the people I work with. I want to feel like someone has noticed me. I'm tired of sitting in my same place, sitting at my dining room table. I want to interact with people. And it's interesting. I'm on calls with lots of different companies all the time. And it's always interesting to see when someone I'm talking to has just taken themselves out of their home environment and just plain old gone to the office, and nobody else is there except them. But they really feel as though they need that separation between my home life and my work life. And I think the longer this goes on, people will start to think more fondly about working back at the office. And so I think a lot of companies that have said, yeah, you know what, we're going to, like Facebook and Google, who have said, go ahead and work at home as long as you want. I'm wondering if they were a little bit too quick to make those pronouncements without letting this play out to help employees figure out what's going to work best for them.
I did have a question that had popped in, and this one is from Susan, but this may also be for the group as a total. So I'll let you weigh in, Sarah. But she's wondering if people are using tracking software to measure productivity with remote workers.
Yeah. So this is something that's become a bit of a hot button. I mean, there are all sorts of software programs that are available to give you, and I don't know how they work, but they kind of track keystrokes or how often you're interacting with your computer. And they're controversial because the people who are for them say, well, I need to know if people are actually working. The people who are against them are saying, well, wait a minute. We're not trusting employees. We're being big brother. We are encouraging the wrong kind of behavior. And do we have people who are going to be gaming the system by trying to show that they're working all the time? This has been an opportunity for organizations to show trust to their employees, to say that we know you're in a difficult situation. We trust you to get the work done. You may not be doing it between 9 and 5. You may be doing it between 6:30 in the morning and 10 o'clock at night, but we trust you to produce those work products that we're expecting from you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you for weighing in on that for sure, Sarah. I think with everything you've shared so far, it's just a lot to take in terms of, that trust factor, the transparency factor, but the engagement part of it. And to think about all those employees who, like you said, onboarded in the middle of the pandemic where it's only been virtual. How do you create, there's no happy hour welcome to the team. There's no, luncheon. So I guess there's some good takeaways there. I think we have some more questions coming in, but I do want to be respectful to get our next panel started. Sarah, we'll get those questions over to you, certainly. And I want to continue encouraging people to post questions in the chat and keep the conversation going.